Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. I think it was a bit gloomy here earlier, but actually it's a bit brighter outside now up north. But hopefully this room will kind of help brighten up your lunchtime. And also, I'm joined by the lovely Alex Hickson, who's going to be very honest and insightful. And so hopefully we'll bring a bit of flair and maybe a bit of humour and just kind of a nice kind of fun chatty lunch hour. So I hope everyone's kind of got sandwiches, tea, coffee, gin, whatever you might need today, and we'll take it from there. So today we're going to be talking about how to cut through the bullshit in digital PR. And when kind of Alex kind of discussed this talk with me, I was really kind of intrigued because I don't think there's many people really talking about this at the moment. And there might be like the odd conversation on Twitter about kind of, advice and people sharing advice, but no one's kind of really analyzing that advice and kind of giving their feedback. So that is what Alex is going to be doing with us today. He's going to be sharing his insight from the last few years of his career. And I think it'll be really interesting, both, whether you've kind of started out in PR, whether you've been in digital PR for a few years, or, even like me, if you're an employer. So what do we need to know, or what are the mistakes to avoid, etc. So I think he's going to kind of share that with us. So before we make a start, I'd just like Alex just to share kind of a bit of information about him and his role, just to give a bit of context.
So hi guys, I'm Alex and I have just joined Rise at 7 as a senior digital PR exec. Before that, I was a digital PR exec at an agency called Edit, which used to be Branded 3, which people might know. And then before that, I used to work in more of like a traditional PR background, and I actually came from recruitment straight after uni. So I think a lot of these odd bits and skills I've learned from different jobs has sort of led me to talking to Jane today about this kind of topic and like what it's helped formulate how to sort of spot really good advice and also sort of spot the bad advice that you probably shouldn't follow as rigidly as you might think. So yeah, I'm hoping it can be like a good discussion.
Definitely. So kind of did something happen where you made what made you think I need to be kind of talking about this or somebody needs to be talking about this?
I think, I suppose over the last 18 months, I feel like I've learned so much so quickly. And I think when sometimes, especially quite early on in your career, if you can sit and take stock of like how far you've come, like in a year or 2 years or something like that, you should actually be quite proud of yourself because the amount of knowledge and sort of nuances of the job that you take on is a hell of a lot of information. But I think it's really competitive as well, and that's not a bad thing. I think competition makes you better, but I think it's important to understand that what people might always be telling you, whether that's someone that's a lot more senior than you, or one of your colleagues, or maybe someone that's outside the agency you're working in, or a client, just because they say it and they might have been doing this longer than you doesn't necessarily mean it's like gospel, and to sort of trust your own instincts a little more. And it's been really interesting to sort of navigate my journey through that to sort of get to where I am now and to understand that there's pieces of advice that I sort of swear by, and there's pieces of advice that actually I remember because they're what I try not to do, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's a really good point because it's such a kind of fast-paced career. I think no matter kind of what stage you're at, and I think, when you start out, you just kind of get thrown in the deep end anyway. So you'll hear so much advice just kind of thrown at you, and then you're expected to kind of obviously kind of take it on board and like you say, kind of decide what's useful and kind of what's not useful to you. And also it's where that advice comes from. Does it come from a colleague? Does it come from a manager? Does it come from, people that you admire on social media? And that kind of plays a role in it too, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting. Obviously, sort of thinking back of like the last 18 months or so, some of the advice that I like really cherish and always remember didn't come from someone that might have been doing the job for like 10, 15 years, but it was actually someone that I sort of started with or had been doing the job maybe 6 months or a year, or someone that wasn't even in the digital PR team. It was someone that was working on the content or the design or was in one of the paid teams or something like that. But I think it's always quite interesting because I think especially with like SEO, digital PR, Twitter, and the way it is on social media, I think we kind of live in this little bubble,
Yeah.
and it's great because we love to see what other agencies are doing and what people are doing for their campaigns. But I think it's really important to take advice from people that maybe have taken that step back and are kind of outside that a little bit, because you can get really caught up in your own ideas and sort of bigging everyone else up and thinking that what you're doing is really good. But if one person or a couple of people, whether that might even be like your mum or your nan or something, trying to explain a campaign to them, if they can be like, oh, actually, have you thought about that? It's that kind of insight that you wouldn't necessarily seek, but you think, oh, actually, it kind of gets your brain whirring, and then you can sort of run with it and maybe challenge what's going on, just because, yeah, I just think it's good to sort of challenge the things that are being done and not to be too scared about doing that if it's come from elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And I also like the point you made about kind of listening to people that might be slightly outside of what we do as well. Whether that's somebody kind of working in content or whether they're kind of in a completely separate role, but they have kind of advice that might kind of cross over, or just kind of how to think about situations. It might not be specific to the campaign you're working on or the client or anything about that, but it might be about mindset, for example, and how you kind of manage pressures or whatever it might be.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting as well, moving into doing the more like strategy side of the job rather than just like outreach.
Yeah.
How much you have to consider when taking like a campaign from like zero to hero, literally. So like even this morning, like I was going over like the content for a campaign that we're planning. And one of my colleagues was sort of came out with a really good hook, like that she'd pulled from the data, and I was like, "That's literally amazing! I didn't think of that. No one else in the original PR team had thought of that." But to me, that's like the best hook so far that we've got for this campaign. It's got me really excited about it again. And it's just listening to
Yeah.
those people and sort of having the time to do it. And I think that's one thing that people really struggle with. It's so fast paced, and you're obviously wanting to meet client deadlines all the time. So just to have that time to actually just have a chat about the campaign with everyone that's involved in sort of every stage. And I think a lot of the time that can get lost. And I think it's a really valuable part of doing the strategy for a campaign and making sure you're getting those insights from different teams, because ultimately they can spot something that you can't, even if you've completely covered it and you're all on track with it and you're really happy that it's all sort of timing well and the client's happy with it. But if you don't have that time to almost let it breathe,
Yeah.
I don't think you can get the best out of it necessarily.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, the more people that can look at an idea, especially those that kind of aren't in your team and don't know the context, don't know about the brand, etc., the more kind of informative it is in a way, because they're coming at it completely fresh with no expectations, etc. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we call it kind of the pub test in our office. So,
Yeah.
could you take the idea down the pub? Would it float? What would the feedback be, etc., from people that have no idea what you're trying to achieve? So,
Yeah, 100%. And I think one thing that I think I've spoken about this before in like previous talks and stuff, but I think I always try and like consider the gaps, and I think that's like absolutely essential. Is that you can think of an idea, and then as you obviously go to build the campaign and start to think of the content and how it's going to look and how you're going to sort of sell it to press, the original idea, which might have been really good, can get a bit lost in translation. And I think at every stage you need to like consider the gaps and like what emotions is this campaign going to invoke, like what talking points is this going to answer somebody's question. And if the answer to any of them questions is no, I think you need to like take the time to stop and be like, well, hang on a minute, why is this relevant? Why should people care about this?
yeah,
Like the six of us on this team might be fully invested in it and think that it's a really, really good idea, but why should people care? Like, is it going to make us happy or sad, or is it going to shock people? If you can't tangibly answer any of those questions, I
yeah.
think you need to like go back and reevaluate it, because ultimately that's what's going to translate well into a news hook or making it go viral on social media or something like that.
Definitely. Yeah, completely agree. So, going back to kind of the advice, let's start with the good advice. Can you give a couple of examples of advice that's been really memorable and just kind of really resonates with you?
Yeah. I think one of the best ones ever was try and quickly as possible figure out what you like about the job or elements that you might be really good at, but just as quickly figure out what you hate. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think when you're starting out in your career, it's you want to people please, and you want to come across like you're happy with all aspects of the job, and you want to be, a jack of all trades, and sort of get the point across that you're happy to do it all. But I think if you can understand your strengths and, just as importantly, your weaknesses, then it helps you connect with other people and also understand your team. So like there's elements of the job that I don't necessarily love doing, but I know that like people on my team excel at it and like absolutely love doing it. So why would I try and do it and not try and lean on my team when they're happy to do it and could probably get better results than I could, and vice versa? Like there's elements of like outreach and say like maybe newsjacking that I know I'm not as strong as other people on my team, but instead of trying to plow on through and just pretend that I am, why not lean on them and get them to help or get them to do them parts of it when I know there's parts of the campaign or building the strategy that I might be stronger at. And then I think if you can work more collaboratively, ultimately the campaign's going to have the best chance of success.
Yeah, definitely. I know from a management perspective, it's much more useful if people can be honest about kind of what they like, what they dislike, what they don't think they're as strong at. So you can kind of lean on other people to help you out, but then you can help them out with what they're not as strong at as well. And that's something that we do a lot of.
Yeah.
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 Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, I think as well, sort of leaning onto that and like understanding people's styles. I think that was a big one for me because I came from when I used to work in recruitment, and then even when I moved into traditional PR, it was quite corporate, and like the PR that I was doing for clients were quite serious clients. It was more serious stuff instead of like fun campaigns. And changing my style and understanding the style of my team, I think, was really important. So I think being able to talk to a journalist or talk to a client on very much a human level, and making sure that if you're putting a front on, say, to a client and something's gone wrong, say something needs to be delayed and you have to push back to that client, I think if they can understand that you're a human at the end of the day, things do go wrong, it's a lot easier to manage that process. I think if you are so caught up in sort of putting on this like maybe like corporate bravado, it's quite hard to then sort of mitigate things that maybe just don't go to plan. And I think understanding the styles of your team helps that as well, knowing that potentially maybe someone is the best person to be that client facing person, whereas someone else is just really good at getting the work done. And I think it's interesting, like when you look at things like press releases and outreach emails and stuff, like you can get multiple successes from different members of your team, but there's definitely ways that I would never write like some of my colleagues do, and they would never write like I do. But that's not to say that either of our ways is wrong. It's just very different, and it might work for the clients that they're working on or the journalists they're going out to. So I think taking the time to not only figure out what you like yourself, but what your team is good at or not as good at is really, really important.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, that it's not just about you and your strengths, it's about the collective strengths of the team too.
Yeah, definitely.
So what other good advice have you received then?
I think good advice. I think a lot of it goes down and sort of relates back to like personal brand and sort of putting yourself out there a little bit. I remember when I started my job at Edit, my last agency, I sort of made myself a brand new Twitter account and just sort of thought, I'm just going to use it to just maybe like interact with journalists, like see if there's any requests or anything like that. And then I just started to use it as a bit more of like as a platform to sort of communicate campaigns that I was working on or interact with people and just do a bit of stalking of what everyone else was up to, really. But I think it was when I started to do like when I was on furlough, I did a couple of like on the bench videos about like rounds up of the week, like good PR, maybe not so good PR, and like favorite campaigns. And I was really uncomfortable doing it at the beginning. Like I didn't really like the sound of my own voice, and it was just a bit awkward and a bit cringe. But then I had some like really good feedback that was saying that it was really helpful and that it was, obviously helping, I suppose, like big up my presence in the industry, if that's even a thing. And then I never really bought into that until I ended up getting my job at Rise. Because I didn't really formally interview for my job at Rise at all. I think I'd just gotten under the nose of carrying everyone there so much that they were just like, all right, let's see what this guy can do. So it really benefited me in the end that I was able to sort of move into another job where they already had quite a good idea about me and my skills and my personality and stuff already. And I definitely think that being told to sort of spend a little bit of time thinking about that and maybe sharing what you're doing was some of the best advice ever, because it
Yeah.
sort of stood me instead for where I am now, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's an interesting one because I mean, I don't know whether there was kind of so much emphasis on kind of having a social presence kind of a few years ago, or whether it's just crept in. I haven't really noticed. But do you feel like there's pressure on people entering the industry to have a social presence, you know, to be getting themselves talks, to be kind of putting themselves out there, maybe?
I think I think there probably is a bit of pressure now, just because a lot of people are doing it, and I think we love to shout about our successes and stuff, and I think people are good at shouting about maybe what's not gone to plan as well, but probably less so. But I think what's important is not to sort of say to yourself, right, everyone's doing this like personal brand thing, and I hate the term personal brand anyway. I just think that it makes it sound really calculated and
It
like
makes it sound like a job in its own right too.
yeah, and I think that's the problem, because it's not like I ever set out to be like, right, I need to just make loads of noise on Twitter or just tweet random stuff or anything like that. It's more just, I think a big part of what we do and what makes it translatable for someone that's reading a campaign or a client or anything is about being authentic.
Mm.
And I think that it's almost quite a saturated industry. There's loads of people that do what I do and do what we all do, um, and you don't always have to reinvent the wheel, although it's brilliant if you can. But what is, and sort of why is your take on something worth listening to? Like the way that you might describe something or the way that you communicate it is actually the interesting part, not necessarily the content, although obviously the content helps. So I think that if you can maybe not try and sort of actively rack your brain and think, how can I stand out amongst all this? If you can think more in the lines of how can I convey my personality
Yeah.
online or through social media, I think that will help, because I've said it before and I think it's so true, is that like at the end of the day, your personality is your biggest selling point. It's unique to you, no matter what experience you have or whether you've been doing the job for a year or 10 years. It's still probably the thing that's most unique to you. So try and use it the best you can. And I think social media should be a reflection of your personality, even in like a professional setting. That's not to say that like my social medias that I use for work, I don't put anything personal on, because I do, and I think that that's helps. I think that people want to know that I was like watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer last night, as well as like doing a really good campaign today, just because it's a talking point and it makes you feel more human.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the stuff that people remember probably more than posting constantly about just the work that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think it, you know, you can talk about campaigns, you can talk about what's going right, but people also need to know who's behind that.
Yeah,
So, you
definitely.
know, because I think that's where the respect comes from, when they can see your personality kind of come out with it too.
Yeah, and I think as well that I think any good campaign should be a story in itself. Like it should be a story and it should have a narrative. And in a way, like I think the way that you can get to that end result of a campaign is like a story in itself. Like um some of the campaigns that you've spent sleepless nights over and something's gone wrong and you think it's all gonna not work, and then a similar campaign might launch the same day and you just think, God, how on earth am I going to pull this one out of the bag? And then you might end up getting some really good results. But I think people might be actually interested in the story behind it as well as just the story itself, if that makes sense. And it kind of adds that extra layer of,
Yeah.
you might see the end results and think, God, like they're doing really well. Like I wonder why my campaign hasn't done that, or vice versa. When actually, if you are sort of open and authentic about it, not everything's perfect, and there's probably been a lot of like turmoil behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I just think that there's a lot of graft that goes in that people respect, and that I don't think like it doesn't have to be hidden up or not spoken about.
And I think, I mean, I personally think I have more respect for campaigns that work when I know there's, you know, they've overcome some challenges during that process, and maybe there was a bit of a battle going on, or what, I don't know, that some adversity in there rather than that everything was plain sailing and then they got like great results, etc.
Yeah,
We know how hard that is. We know that doesn't happen very often.
yeah.
So you know that there were sleepless nights probably, and people were wondering whether it was a good idea after all and things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where I think there's a lot of like imposter syndrome in the industry, and I think people are talking about it a lot more.
Yeah.
But I remember literally even now, like sometimes I look at a campaign and I'm like, God, like I feel like I could never think of that. Or there's a way that something's executed, and I think, God, like I sort of think, am I really good enough? Like, am I good enough to be here? Am I good enough to be doing the job that I'm doing? But then sometimes if you see that, the shiny end result isn't all that's happened, it's not been plain sailing, and everyone probably has them feelings, no matter if you're just coming into an agency, if you're running an agency yourself. I think people respect it more. I think a really good analogy I saw once is that if you think about the way you like make friends, like in your personal life, you don't always make friends with people that are like totally perfect, and that's not how you build chemistry with someone or build a rapport with somebody. It's all the flaws and all the things in between as well that make that up. And I think it's the same thing with the way we present ourselves on social and our personal brands and what we do in our jobs as well. I just think that it might seem like you're admitting your failings, but really you're just admitting that, a lot of graft went into this. And actually the end result is a testament to all the things that went wrong along the way as well.
Yeah, you're just admitting that you're human, that you might fail, and it's much easier to relate to that person than relate to somebody that always does something perfectly.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk about bad advice. So
Okay.
give me a couple of examples of bad advice that you've heard. You don't have to say names, etc., unless you want to.
Well, I think it always sticks with me because I think it's the thing that I've not done the most, which has benefited. But I always got told in the first 6, 12 months of a job, keep your head down, don't rock the boat, keep your head down, and you'll sort of get recognized for the hard work that you're putting in. And I just think that's really bad advice, to be honest. I just think, no, I think, especially in this industry, or any creative industry really, to sort of go in to whether it's in-house or an agency or whatever, at any sort of seniority, I think it's a lot harder when you're starting off because you do feel like you're not as experienced and you don't have that kind of influence, say, within a team. But I think if you're going in to just do things how they've always been done in that agency, you're not going to bring any kind of fresh perspective or like fresh creative ideas. And just because something's been done a certain way for X amount of years doesn't mean it's the right way. I think that's the kind of mentality that agencies maybe can coast by on and plateau, but you're not going to sort of set the world on fire or come up with anything innovative.
In the end, that's just going to hold you back. That's going to hold everybody in the team back. It's going to hold performance back overall and people's careers as well. And you learn by failing. So keeping your head down just seems like, it seems ridiculous, really. It's just like, you need to be seen but not heard kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of that comes with like seniority and stuff. Like I mean, just from like different work environments I've worked in, there's places where title means a lot, and there's places where a title's a title and it's a lot more of like a fluid atmosphere. But I think when you're going in sort of as like a junior role, if you're being told something by like your director or head of or I don't know, a CMO or something, you sort of, unless you're really, really confident in what you're saying, you automatically think like, oh, I shouldn't challenge that, or I shouldn't maybe bring a new idea. When I don't think that's always the case. I often find that a lot of the time the junior people coming in are the ones with the fresh perspective, and that's an opportunity that I think a lot of teams need to sort of grab and harness instead of like quashing that out of them and sort of molding them into another cog in that agency wheel, if that makes sense. Just because before long, like if you are sort of early in your career, you do want to be molded a little bit and you do want to like absorb things off everybody. But if everyone is like singing off the same hymn sheet, I think it'll just prohibit creativity in the long run.
Yeah, and it's a shame to think that that might be happening in kind of teams within our industry, but
Yeah.
it will be to other people's benefits, won't it? It will be to other agencies' benefits, etc. So
Yeah.
that mentality for that team, for that brand, that agency, just it's a shame. It's a real shame, and it also might put people off continuing their career as well. If you can't speak up, if you can't voice an opinion, as long as it's done respectfully, etc.
Yeah.
And that should, everyone should want to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a big there's a lot of advice I think as well that obviously it's the landscape we're like working in is constantly changing,
Yeah.
and obviously like this year with like COVID and everying, it's like the rule books are just like ripped up and then have to be rewritten as we
Sorry, the
do.
lights have just gone off in here.
um, and I think it's situations like that where if you've not sort of already bred a culture of being open and sort of letting people challenge the way you do things, then it's these sort of situations and changing landscapes that are going to completely floor you in the long run. Like, how are you meant to react to something if you don't allow your teams or your juniors or whatever to be adaptable and like flexible in what they're doing? I think like it's just for me it was really interesting moving from like quite a traditional background into digital, because I didn't really have too much of a clue on like SEO and stuff like that. I've just sort of learned as I've gone on, but there's loads of advice that used to be like gospel in traditional PR that people in digital like disagree with. Like the whole idea that you should be on the phone all the day to a journalist, like that I think is the worst advice ever. Like journalists don't have time to be sat on the phone to you. And I think when I went in, I had that expectation and I kind of was like, should I be picking up the phone just to sort of keep face and make it look like I'm being really busy? But it's little pieces of advice like that that you kind of have to start and then realize that it
Yeah.
doesn't always translate. It might not even translate agency to agency or different clients in different industries. But yeah, for moving into digital, there was like little nuggets like that I used to think just really didn't correlate.
And you'll find through personal experience whether the phone is right for you, whether you're more of an email person. And, making someone phone journalists when it's uncomfortable for them is just, it's a nightmare for everybody and it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So, I think people need to also stick with what they're comfortable with. And yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that goes back to like trying to understand your team and your colleagues like as quickly as possible. Like just even little things like when I remember talking to some of my old colleagues at Edit when I was on furlough and just was like, I want to do something to sort of, do a bit of a PR roundabout. I wanted to do something. And I was thinking, I think it was about the time that Abby Bennett from Digital Loft like started releasing her work in progress newsletters.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, these are brilliant. Like, what a great way to start rounding the week up. And I thought about doing it, and I was like, but I don't think that I would be able to do it to this standard. Like, if anything, it would just be the worst version of what loads of other people are doing in the industry. And I was like, I think I can come across better in person or on a video than in writing. And it's just little things like that that if there was a situation where like a colleague wasn't comfortable like being on camera or doing some sort of pitch or something, like I'd be more than happy to do it because I suppose it's the thing I'm quite comfortable doing. But I know that if there was like a really good chunk of writing or there was something that needed to be done sort of better than I could do it, I'd have no qualms in being like, you're amazing at doing this, please help me out. Like, I think it sort of just rounds it all back together, to be honest.
Definitely. Is there any other bad advice you'd like to mention before we talk about kind of navigating your first years of success?
I suppose again, it sort of harks back to maybe like the personal brand kind of thing, and I think authenticity. I think it just bad advice that I've been given is to make sure that you're doing things in like an arbitrary way. I can't think of a good way to explain this, to be honest. It's like you need to be setting so much time aside to work on your Twitter. You need to be setting so much time aside to be doing this for this client that day.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think everyone works really differently. And just because the way that you work might not be like the agency standard or the standard of the team, if you can be open about that with, say, like your manager or colleagues or whatever, and just say, like, look, I can still get the results that you want by Friday or whatever your deadline is. However, I'm going to work this way, then that's fine. I think obviously it's a different story if you say this and then you don't get the work done. Obviously, then there's a bit of an issue. But I think understanding your way of working and not being afraid to be quite upfront about it, because at the end of the day, if I think if you're working in a good agency with a good team, they'll understand that you just want to be in an environment where you work best, whether that's in a big group environment, at home more, or anything like that. And I
Yeah.
think bad advice I got given was again, don't rock the boat, just do what you're told to do. I'm like, I don't think that that's actually very helpful for you
Yeah.
or the team you're in.
Yeah. The rock in the boat thing. I mean, yeah, don't kind of create too many waves, etc. But to not be able to kind of say things and kind of voice an opinion, I think is a real shame, and it kind of flies against kind of what we do in this industry of being kind of creative and coming up with new ideas and being innovative. And to do that, you need to be able to feel comfortable to kind of share opinions, and maybe occasionally rock the boat, but for good reason.
Yeah, I think a good way to go about it is, for me, like the sort of frustrations and stuff I've had previously is where a lot of good PR is fast and it's reactive on what's going on in the news cycle or whatever. Like everything we do is based upon culture and trends and things like that. So if you have a great idea that you think could work, but it needs to be done in a matter of days or hours or however long it is, I think if you can understand the way to approach like a team, or say you need a really quick design doing or something like that, or you even just need it signed off by someone a lot more senior. I think if you can say and justify your reasoning for sort of speaking up about this quite so frankly, it makes it a lot easier, because then if that pays off, everyone else is going to be like, well, I'm really glad you did that because our client's super, super happy with what we've just done. And then even if it doesn't, I always think that like an apology is better than regret. Like, what if you never tried and then you saw the week later that another agency had done the idea that you just never managed to get off the ground and it became super, super successful? Like, that'd kill me if I'd seen that. So I've always,
That happens regularly, doesn't it?
yeah, and it does. And I think a lot of the time it's speed, which
Mm.
obviously as you sort of navigate the workings of a company, however big or small it is, it gets harder and harder to do things at speed. And I think being able to speak up and sort of talk about it and vocalize it, no matter if you're 3 months into the job talking to someone that's been in it for 5 and is 3 or 4 positions above you. I think if you're confident in the idea and that it is dependent on maybe tearing up like a process or doing it fast, I think it's worth it if you think you could get a good result with a campaign or for a client.
Yeah. Completely agree. So we're kind of running out of time a little bit, but I want to ask you what advice you have for those kind of literally just starting out or in their kind of first year. What would you like to kind of share?
I think the first one would be get yourself on social media, get following people in the industry, get following people in like the creative industries. Don't just silo yourself off into this kind of like digital PR bubble. I think that you can sort of fall into the trap of following. But I think as well is that understanding that you, even if you've just started out, you've been hired for a reason, so they've obviously spotted something in you, and a lot of that will probably be your creativity or your perspective or the way that you think up things that maybe other people in the team don't. And I think sort of overcoming that imposter syndrome is really important, and understanding that you're bringing something to the team that probably is quite unique. And in that, you need to really try and focus on what it is that
Yeah.
you can offer and do that quickly. If like you're wanting to sort of rise through the ranks quicker or you want to get more experience, I think it's a really good piece of advice to, don't constantly wait for the opportunities to do stuff. So say if you want to lead strategy on a campaign, don't sort of wait around for someone to suggest it. Like if you've got a good idea for strategy and your seniors are obviously, sort of okay with it, run with it. If you're doing the job at the end of the day and you're doing it well, then you've got so much more leverage to go and be like, okay, I think it's time for a promotion. I think it's time that I should be having more involvement on this because I've been doing it already. And if you've been doing it well, then there's a much less argument on the other side as to why you shouldn't be doing that. So I think that's definitely advice there. Like, I wish I suppose I'd had like going in, and is what I'd definitely tell people that are maybe just starting out.
Well, you seem to be doing that now. I mean, you came to me and, obviously with an idea for a webinar, and here you are. So I think it's a good example of how you've got to go out and find the opportunities. And obviously
Mm.
that's how you got in front of Rise at 7 too. So yeah, like you say, it's just kind of putting yourself out a little bit and seeing kind of what comes back a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a fine line between like cockiness and sort of feeling like, maybe you're going too far. But I think most people undersell themselves. And I hate it so much when I see people that are like super, super talented and have maybe just not had the break, or they've not maybe upselled themselves enough, or they don't believe in their own talent. Because at the end of the day, like I said, everyone has a unique skill set and sort of perspective that they can share. And yeah, I definitely think it's advice that sort of just go for it. I know it's so much easier said than done, but like I said before, I think I'd rather like just aim for something and sort of fall and learn from the failings than just sit there and be like, oh God, I wish I'd have done that, or I wish I'd have done that. Like I'd hate to regret stuff like that.
And I think that's a really kind of nice way to kind of round off everything, really. So yeah, don't regret anything and just
Yeah,
all the opportunities you can.
Yeah, just learn from it. Don't regret from it. That's what I always try and do through everything, even if it's an absolute disaster. I'm like, oh well, we go again.
Yeah, we learn from our fails, don't we? Well, hopefully
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, 100%.
Cool. Okay, so now let's take some questions, and I think you can ask Alex anything. He's very honest, very happy to share. So go for it. Don't hold back. So Alex, we've got a question from Lydia. You have a great social media presence and are great at putting yourself out there. Is there anything you've learned about the benefits and maybe negatives of promoting yourself on social? That's a nice question.
Ooh, yeah, I think benefits is sort of the job I'm doing now. Like I said, I knew that like Rise at Seven would be like a good move for me career wise. It was kind of figuring out how to get in front of them in a way that maybe people weren't. Um, and it's kind of going back to that if you're thinking about your personal brand, like, oh, if you're really actively thinking, how can I do it? What niches can I go into? And I was just sort of like, well, I feel like I'm doing good work where I am now, but if I can get that under their nose and show that to them, if they're constantly going through Twitter like, oh God, Alex Hickson again, Alex Hickson again, they're eventually going to sort of take notice of what I'm doing. And it seemed to work. So,
Yeah, obviously.
yeah. So, but then negatives, I suppose. I think there are people that might think it's a bit shallow and maybe sometimes a bit style over substance. But what I'd say to that is that I think you have to strike the balance. Like, I hope that I have helped people and that there's not, I don't do it. Well, I don't do it out of like a sort of like a selfish thing. Like, I genuinely just hope that I can help people. Like when I was trying to figure out that I wanted to go into PR, like it was quite a roundabout way that I ended up getting here. I had like different jobs, ended up going back and doing a master's. Um, and I just remember feeling like really bleak at the time, thinking, God, I'm never going to get into this industry. And sort of time's ticking on, and I feel like I'm getting older and everything. And actually, if someone would have given me these pieces of advice or just sort of shown me that then I feel like I would have had a really more like positive outlook.
Yeah.
So people might be quite negative, but at the end of the day, if you feel like you're doing it all for the right reasons, then you shouldn't have anything to feel negative about.
Exactly. And it's for your benefit at the end of the day, and it's up to you kind of how you portray yourself on social media as well. So
Yeah,
like as long as you're providing more of a balanced kind of view and it's not just here's a load of wins, win, 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 etc. Then
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it goes back to like what we were saying about it's great if you are being really, really successful, but a lot of people are interested in like the journey as well as the final destination. So if you're sharing the journey and the way it's been done and maybe like the nuances of how it's been done different to other people, that's what people are really interested in. I think if you're just constantly screaming and shouting about your successes and there's not really much behind that, people aren't as engaged with that. They think, oh right, it just becomes a bit like background noise.
Definitely. I mean, one of the talks that I did was about PR fails, and it's the most requested talk I've ever done because it was so honest. I basically said, "Yeah, we messed this up. This went wrong. We should have thought about this. We didn't. It kind of, it was really shit, but actually we got over it at the end."
Yeah,
And it's because people want you to be honest. They want to see that things really do go wrong.
yeah,
They like it, and they're
yeah.
quite happy to chat to you about it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I think it's endearing as well. I think, like we said, I think I've spoke about this before. Is that like when you're talking to journalists on social media, like it's really easy to forget they are people. Like I've before have genuinely put journalists on this pedestal, being like, please, please, please give me a link. I'm dying to get coverage, and then you kind of forget, like, hang on a minute, they're writing like 15 stories a day. It makes it easier for you to get into their mindset about why things should be targeted and the way that you're doing your outreach, for example. And yeah, and it just I think is more endearing, and I think it'll just stand you in better stead, and people get to know you better if there's elements of your personality in that, and I think your failings contribute a hell of a lot. What the
exactly. Now we know you're a Buffy fan too.
Yeah, true. Exactly.
Okay, so we've got a question from Josie. She says, "Great advice, Alex. Thank you. Quick question: have you ever pushed back on a bullshit idea from, say, a senior or perhaps a client, and this went horrendously wrong? If you did, how did you mitigate this?"
Um, so a good example of this was I was probably about 3 months into the job last year, and there was a campaign that was going for a client that had kind of been like passed through quite a few people. And it was kind of all ready to sort of go, but I just remember because obviously when you're an exec and maybe you're just on the outreach side of it, you kind of get given a lot of campaigns. And I remember sitting there thinking, actually, I don't think this is that good, or it could definitely be better. And there was a bit of a, oh, we'll just throw it out and see what happens kind of attitude. And I remember sort of getting a bit annoyed about it, really, and sort of getting like people from different teams into a room and just sort of giving my version of how I think it could be improved. Um, and I remember at the time thinking that I really had rocked the boat. And I remember going home that night thinking, oh God, everyone's going to hate me. Like they're going to think I'm such a mouthy idiot, just spewing off about this campaign. But in the end, we did make some amends and we did spend a little bit more time on it. And it ended up being one of the best campaigns for that client that we'd done. And all it needed was just a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of time and care. So I remember that feeling really, really awkward on that. But then luckily the results kind of spoke for itself. But I think that's, again, goes back to like, I'd rather be like, right, sorry guys, it didn't work, but I'm really glad we tried, than think, oh, that campaign did really badly and have to explain that to the client about why it didn't work. So
yeah, it's much easier to have a conversation about what might not work with the team than it is what went wrong with the client later.
yeah, 100%, 100%.
Cool. Okay, so would you suggest following people in the industry you're currently in, or what you desire to be in, or both?
Oh, both. I think it's really good to see what you aspire to be, and then hopefully you can either mirror or better what they're doing, because that's obviously, if that's where you're aspiring to be, that's where you want to get. But I also think it's important to keep up with what other people are doing in the industry, because I think it's just good to know what they're your competitors at the end of the day. And also, if you are thinking, oh, I've got a really good idea about how to communicate this, but three other agencies are doing it on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, and you've not been following that, you might invest loads of time into doing something which actually isn't going to break through because you're up against loads of other competition. But if you can sort of strike the balance of seeing what people are doing and then seeing where you want to be, it's those gaps in between the two, I think, which is where you should be aiming for in what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I've got a really nice question here. So this is from Rachel, and she says, how would you make yourself stand out as a fresh graduate with no work experience in PR? So what's good prep to make an agency let you have an internship with them?
So this is actually, so this happened to me, to be honest. Like I did an undergrad degree in politics, didn't do any work experience or anything when I was there. Went and worked in recruitment for a year, and then realised it was PR that I wanted to do, and really, really struggled because I didn't have much experience, even like an internship or whatever. And obviously, I know it's not doable for everybody, for like financially and everything. But I ended up quitting my job, which was quite well paid in recruitment, and like I just hated it though. And I ended up going back and doing a couple of bits of like traditional PR things, like in the events industry. It wasn't necessarily completely related to what I wanted to do, but it was close enough. And then I went back and studied again about PR, and that's when I really focused on getting internships. And I think it depends on the kind of agencies you want to work for. So I think if you've got your eyes set on maybe a certain type of PR agency, embody what they do. Their social media should really be a reflection of their personality. So like Rise is very out there, very creative. And I knew that if I wanted to get a job there, then I had to think like them. I had to make sure that there was a way for me to break through the noise of other applicants. And if they are like quite a creative thing, then I'd definitely tear up the CV. I'm not saying that the CV is dead or anything, but I think it's probably one of the most competitive times for grads, unfortunately. So any way you can think to sort of get yourself out there and just ask for an internship, then do it. I remember I sent off like campaign posters, I sent off like trays of sweets, I like obviously made a lot of noise on social media, I've done videos, all sorts of stuff to try and get experience when I was back at uni. And some of it worked, some of it didn't, but ultimately I got enough experience behind me to then move into a proper career with it. So I just think, I don't think like a PR, and think about your email or your application landing in that person's inbox. If I say, if it was to me and I've got like 200 emails to wake up to, why am I going to open yours amongst all the others? So try and put yourself into that mindset and be creative about it.
I think that's a really nice answer. I think, these days, just a CV is not enough. It doesn't make you stand out at all.
And it's personality. I think people hire on personality a lot more than you'd think. So it's so hard to convey that through a CV. Like I've said before, like I just feel like I don't come across that well on paper all the time. So I remember getting like some work experience doing my masters, and I sent them a CV, but it was just a video of me talking about it and just talking through my experience and talking through why I wanted to work there. It worked. It also saved me time because sometimes writing a CV and a cover letter can take forever. And I think it was like a 4 or 5 minute video. And it worked for me. Obviously, again, it might not work for you, but I think just think about who you're applying for, make it targeted, and think about how you're going to break through the noise.
It sounds like you could do a whole webinar on this topic.
Yeah, I think I just I can relate. I think because I had such worries like after I'd done my masters, which was like marketing and PR. I thought, God, if I can't manage to break through now, then I really feel like I'm never going to. And I just remember feeling really helpless and feeling really hopeless. And then I remember I got my last job in the agency and sort of thought, thank God, like, and hopefully now like my career's gone. But I just remember that feeling, and it is rubbish. And I think if anyone can sort of take away some like proper actionable advice, then
yeah,
it'd be good.
Cool. Okay, let's do one more question, and then I think we'll wrap things up. So I've got a question here. Oh, hang on. I've got one from Olivia, and this is interesting. She says, I'm going to be controversial and more of a discussion point than a question, but I can see the benefits in having a social media presence in the industry, but I often feel like it's just a lot of talk. Do you ever feel like this too? And she goes on to say, I'd almost rather take advice from someone who doesn't share every moment on social. So having a strong professional social media presence is almost another job in itself. What happened to switching off?
That is a good point, to be fair. I think it's totally valid. I think the hardest bit to navigate on social now is like style over substance. I am a big believer in when people have asked me, like how much time should I be contributing on social media? How much time should I be setting aside to do this? I don't think there is an answer to that question. I don't think you should be setting time aside, say like an hour or 2 hours a day. It just needs to become something that you ingrain. For most people, they do spend a lot of time on social media anyway. So for me, I'm like, well, if I am going to share something, why not do it on my PR Twitter instead of my personal one? And I do have a personal one that I use to switch off. Like I'll always switch over and like stop notifications on my accounts and stuff. I think it can come across as quite loud and like you've got to cut through what's actually, worth taking in. But I think understanding, as we've said before, not just like the destination, like maybe the great results that are being posted, it's the journeys that you can learn through that. Like there's so many great advice by multiple agencies, creatives, everybody that talk about the way they've done things. And I think you learn a lot more from the way it's been done.
Yeah.
Sometimes rather than the end result. And even if the end result's good and you've seen the way it's been done, you think, all right, it's good, but I've got an idea that could actually make that better. And then you can run with it. So I do get what Olivia means. Like it can be quite encompassing and sort of overwhelming, but I think it isn't for everyone either. It's not to say that everyone suddenly needs to be making loads and loads of noise, but if you feel that there's something you can share and there's something that's maybe not been communicated, all I'm trying to say is take the leap. And if it benefits you, then great. If it doesn't, you've not lost out that much, really.
Yeah. And if social media is just doing your head in, you can just switch it off, or you can have a break away from it for the weekend or whatever it is. So you do get that kind of downtime, because it's a lot. If you're constantly looking at it and you're constantly looking at it from a work perspective, then there is sometimes no switching off. So.
Yeah, 100%. I do think setting boundaries is really, really important. Like I've just been away for the weekend. I had yesterday annual leave, and like it's as routine as setting like my out of office on my email. I will pause notifications on Slack. I'll log out of my PR Twitter and stay in my personal one. I'll hide notifications. And I think that if that's what you need to do, then there's nothing wrong with doing that at the end of the day. Sometimes like I will have like a funny idea to post or do something at 10 o'clock at night, but that's my choice. I don't feel like it's taking anything from my day. But it's about finding that balance for you as well. And there's also platforms that you might want to communicate on that others don't. So like at the minute, TikTok's obviously having this huge surge and being used within digital PR. And I think it's brilliant. I think some of the content out there is great. Do I think I'm going to become some sort of like TikTok star or start doing those TikToks? I don't think so. I don't necessarily think that's my platform that I'm probably strongest at. But that means that there could be loads of people with great ideas for it, thinking, oh, actually, well, I could. And it's just about finding them niches, I think, where you think you could offer something. And it's not to say you have to be sort of omnipresent on every platform there is.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's a nice kind of way to end, and just kind of, if you're enjoying it, keep doing it, but don't be obsessive about it, I think.
Yeah, I think the best results are from when it's authentic and it doesn't feel like effort. If you feel like it's a lot of effort,
Yeah.
you might be going about it the wrong way, I think.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for all your questions, and thank you, Alex, for being such an amazing guest. Really interesting topic. I hope everyone kind of got something from it, but also kind of resonated. And please feel free to kind of mention any advice that you've experienced on Twitter. It'd be great to kind of get a conversation going. I know Alex would kind of love to comment more, etc., and so would I. So yeah. So thank you again, and
Yeah, thank you.
before everyone disappears, please join us on the 8th of September when we're going to be talking to Serena Chande from Resignal, and she's going to be talking about why she chose to leave journalism and come over to the dark side, which is digital marketing, and how that's impacted her career. So please join us for that, and I think either Aaron or Andy might put the link in the comments for me. And thanks again for joining us. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.